So you probably kind of know that the Bible is one that I use, is a collection of different books. Some of those are people writing historical stories about things that have happened. Some of them are people writing their memories and their accounts of things that have gone on. Some of them are books of poems. Some of them are love stories. There's a whole different variety of different things. In fact, the word Bible is the same word as the word in French that they use for library, bibliothèque, a collection of different books and different styles. So when we talk about reading different books of the Bible, it's because within this one book are different books, and each book has a different purpose and was written in a different way by a different person for a different reason. But interwoven through all of those different things written by different people, the story of who God is and who the world and what the world is and why he created it and us within it comes through. And right in the middle of that story comes this guy called Jesus, who we believe as Christians, it was God as a man who ties it all together through the life that he lived. So that's the context of the Bible. I thought today I would share with you a little bit about this book called Galatians that we are looking at the moment in Illuminate, about where Galatians fits into all of that. So Galatians is a letter. It was a letter written by somebody specifically to somebody else. So we have to understand the context. So we have to understand the context of who was writing it, when he was writing it, and who he was writing it to. So this letter was written about 50 years probably after Jesus was born, so quite early on in the development of what we now call and understand as the church, the people that were choosing a life to try and emulate this life that Jesus has read. So if it's about 50 years after he was born, it's probably less than 20 years from when he died. So really, really early on in the start of the church. And it's written by a guy called Paul, who was a follower of Jesus, but Paul wasn't somebody who had been following Jesus when Jesus was alive. He's this guy that had this incredible encounter with Jesus through this vision. And it had transformed his life, and he had devoted his entire life to understanding who Jesus was and talking to other people about who Jesus was so that they could understand him for themselves. Really, really inspirational guy. And he wrote loads and loads of letters to various different groups of people who were wrestling with what does it mean to follow Jesus. He obviously couldn't travel everywhere. He did travel loads. He couldn't travel everywhere. We didn't have the technology that we've got now for him to communicate with them. So letters were the way that he communicated. And so this book, Galatians, was one of those letters that he was writing to a bunch of people who were trying to become a church and follow Jesus in a particular part of the world called Galatia at the time. So that's why it's called Galatians. And so we need to understand a little bit about Galatia, what was going on with those people there. One of the biggest challenges for people who were trying to explore what it meant to follow God was to try and work out what it meant to be Jewish and what it meant to be a follower of God, because Jesus was a Jew. They were coming out of the context of being part of the Jewish religion and the Jewish faith. Most of what Jesus was talking about was based in the Jewish traditions and the Jewish faith, but he was challenging some things, and he was challenging people to think differently. And these people are trying to work out day to day, week to week, what it is that makes us distinctly different as Christians from the Jewish place that we've come out of. And what do we need to maintain, and what can we let go of as we take on new ways of being people that follow God through Jesus. So it's quite a difficult time for people to work out, and you can imagine lots of disagreements and arguments in that. So in amongst all of that, Paul writes to this church to try and help them in those discussions and those debates that they're having. He's trying to help them work through what it means for them to be followers of Jesus, to be Christians. And he's talking to them about what they need to give up and what they need to move on from. And he can talk with real authority into that because he was Jewish. He was somebody who had been a real, really religious person, a real person of faith within the Jewish tradition. And because of this encounter with Jesus he's changed some of his direction, he's changed some of his thinking, he's changed some of his actions so that he can follow Jesus. So he's got experience personally of this stuff. So that's the big context of the book of Galatians. And as we look through this book over the coming weeks, and we're going to be picking out some various bits each week that I think are really interesting to us to think about. Paul's experiences and what Paul writes to this church 2050 years ago, something like that. There's things in there that are just as relevant to us as people who are trying to follow Jesus, but are also part of a world and a culture that's in some ways quite similar, but in other ways quite different. We're having to grapple with similar kind of challenges in our lives. What makes us distinctly Christian? What is it about God that makes us want to make our actions in a certain way? Are there things within the world that we have to not be involved in because we want to stay true to following Jesus? Are there other things that it's okay to be involved in? So I think there's some real interesting things that we can learn from this really old letter to a particular group of people. So over the coming weeks, we're going to be exploring little bits of Galatians to try and find out what it means for us. I hope you're going to enjoy being on that journey together.